Jeanette Steemers es catedrática de medios de comunicación y codirectora del Communications and Media Research Institute de la University of Westminster. Es especialista en el estudio de las industrias mediáticas, de la circulación internacional de los contenidos televisivos y especialmente también destaca su línea de investigación sobre los media europeos. Entre sus múltiples publicaciones destaca especialmente los libros monográficos sobre el media, libros monográficos sobre los estudios mediáticos europeos, como el Media in Europe Today, el Regaining the Initiative for Public Service Media, Selling Television, British Television in the Global Marketplace o el monográfico European Television Industries. Ha publicado en numerosas revistas de reconocido prestigio internacional como Television and New Media, Convergence, Journal of Children and the Media, International Journal of Media and Cultural Politics, Popular Communication o HuffPost, entre otras. La profesora Steemers es también editora asociada para Europa de la prestigiosa revista Convergence y además es miembro del comité de la publicación Media Industries Journal y del European Research Group. También es miembro del Consejo Asesor de Disney Junior en Estados Unidos. Además, colabora con diferentes organizaciones, tanto nacionales como internacionales, como en la dirección del Servicio de Defensa del Audiovisual Británico, The Voice of the Listener and Viewer, y también es miembro ejecutivo del Comité de MEXA, que es de Media Communication and Cultural Studies Association. Es miembro además del Grupo de Investigación Europeo Euromedia, así como del grupo de planificación de la conferencia Revisionary Interpretations of the Public Enterprise. Así que hoy ha venido a presentarnos la ponencia del servicio público de los medios de comunicación en el siglo XXI y le agradecemos especialmente su presencia aquí. Thank you very much, Professor Steemers. Please.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you to Professor Marcel Felici for inviting me, and to Jessica Izquierdo for organising my visit. My role today is to talk to you about the future of public service broadcasting in the 21st century. And as I was writing this, I realised that actually the title was a bit narrow, and what I should really be talking about is public service media. Because when we talk about public service broadcasting these days, we're not just talking about radio and television. We're also talking about other services that include the internet and social media. I'm not going to spend lots of time talking in detail about media regulation and media governance, because this is really important, I know, but I know that you're covering it at the conference anyway. What I want to do today is talk to you about the concept of public service broadcasting, what it means, what it does, a little bit about its history, what it stands for, and how it is perceived, because public service broadcasting is not in a very good state, and the greatest challenge for public service broadcasting or public service media is how it's going to change as the media world around it changes, and crucially, how is it going to remain relevant? And it's a really, really difficult thing to do. It's a really difficult challenge, because it will probably never be enough. Whatever public service broadcasters do, it will never satisfy the politicians. And even if public service broadcasting is at its most simplest and at its most best and stresses its values most clearly and does the most amazing things, it will simply never be enough. It's always going to be in a constant battle. And sometimes it loses that battle. And we were brutally reminded of the dangers of that recently, following the closure of Greek broadcaster ERT in 2013, and of course the regional public service broadcaster here in Valencia. So, you know, it's tough times for public service media. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about five things, I can't count. First of all, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that public service media faces and the crises that it faces. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the main principles of public service media, what makes it different, and I'm going to think about whether that still makes sense. And then I'm going to talk about 3 things that I think are really important for public service media and are the biggest danger or opportunity for them. The first is the relationship with the state, public service broadcasting in the state, which is always a very tricky relationship, very difficult relationship. And the second thing I'm going to talk about is the ability of public service media to engage with young people and particularly children. Because children's media is a really important part of what public service broadcasting does. And also it gives me a really good opportunity to show a nice video, so that's good. And then finally I'm going to talk about public service media within a new ecology of new providers. Can I just ask you guys something? How many people here subscribe to Netflix? Is Netflix in Spain yet? Anybody? Okay. All right. So that's something that's still got to come to you, I think, but it's an interesting development. Okay, so, and I also will try and keep any references to the BBC to a minimum, because British people always bore people to death with the BBC, so I'm not going to talk so much about the BBC. Okay, so we live in a much more complicated media environment. And where does that leave public service media? Do the old principles that favour a non-profit organisation that pursues non-commercial priorities, do they still work? So what are the main challenges, crises and criticisms of public service media? Now, I've been an enthusiastic student of public service broadcasting for many years now, over 30 years, because I did my undergraduate dissertation on West German public service broadcasting, so I've been looking at it for quite a long time. And it seems to me that the challenges to public service broadcasting are very new in one sense. They're very new because we have new technologies and new ways of enjoying the media, but also the challenges are also very old and very familiar. You know, the things about, you know, independence and the politicians interfering and all this kind of stuff. But the challenges feel more intense, but the questions in many ways are almost the same. So the first question is, you know, what is public service broadcasting? What is public service media? How can we define it? You know, it's a really difficult question, and you know, depending on which country you come from, you might get different definitions. So it's not an easy thing to define, but it is really important to define it, because how can you defend something if you can't define it? And I suppose the second question is, you know, do we still need it? You know, why do we need public service media? You know, you can watch everything on YouTube, or you can subscribe to Netflix for £6 a month, or you can, you know, watch football on a commercial supplier. So do we still need it in this multi-platform social media age? And then I suppose that leads on to the next question. Why should we support it? Why should we sustain it? And how are we going to do that? How are we going to sustain it? We're all living in a climate of austerity, economic austerity. Governments keep on telling us that we've spent too much money, that we need to make savings. You know, can we sustain public service broadcasting? And also, if public service broadcasting is publicly funded, should we sustain it? Does it do enough to deserve our support? Does it do a good job? Does it fulfil its public service remit? Does it reach out to enough people? Does it reach out to everybody rather than just a few people? And if you're thinking of public funding, should it get that special treatment? Should it get public funding for doing, you know, drama or news or documentaries or children's programmes? You know, should we be publicly funding television when our health service and our education services are under threat? You know, what makes it special? So the old debates about public service broadcasting never really go away, but they're changing. And for many public service broadcasters, These are times of crisis, real crisis. There are more political attacks, which really reveal, they lay bare how close public service broadcasters are to the state. There are funding pressures, okay? Public service broadcasters throughout Europe are saying they haven't got enough money to do what they want to do. They haven't got enough money to do something which is really important and really expensive to do, which is make original programs, make Spanish programs or Danish programs or British programs, make original content instead of buying it all in from America. But I don't want to be like apologise or be an apologist for public service media, because some public service broadcasters are not very good. Some are very poorly run. They are under the thumb of the politicians. They're not very interested in their publics. They don't make very good programs. They've become agents of state propaganda, or they have followed self-interested commercial priorities. Some public service broadcasters in Eastern, Central and Southern Europe, really struggle. They've always been more vulnerable to political interference. Now, the dark clouds of crisis are nothing new for public service broadcasting, but it seems as if the magnitude, the size of the storm is getting stronger and more threatening. There are more criticisms about distinctiveness, about low quality programming, and a failure to connect with different people in society. And these criticisms have been encouraged by the election of more right-wing, market-driven governments, and also by commercial rivals who would quite like to see public service broadcasters gone because they're rivals. The heart of the crisis for public service broadcasting is really the question about how defensible or justifiable is public service broadcasting in Europe. Why should it get scarce public resources that are more deserved perhaps by other institutions like health or education? So the fact that it's in trouble, public service broadcasting is in trouble, is not new. And the key question is whether and how much it needs to change, because it can't keep on going on like this. There are strong pressures on public service broadcasters to reduce their size. There have been channel closures. You've known that here in Valencia, you know it in Greece. There are attempts to limit public service broadcasting's investment, to make sure that they don't become so involved in online and digital operations. There are attempts to narrow what they do, almost telling them that, they shouldn't be doing commercially attractive content. There are attempts to make them subject to more intrusive assessment procedures. I mean, public service broadcasters, especially the ones in the UK, are constantly being examined and being reviewed, and everything is being looked at. But there's one thing that we need to remember, is that in spite of all their faults, in spite of the fact that sometimes they don't work very well, they are often the only provider of domestically produced content for certain genres. High quality drama, children's programming, political documentaries, news, current affairs. All those things on which the democratic process depends. So try and imagine it, if they shut down RTVE tomorrow, if they shut it down, would it matter? If they shut down the BBC tomorrow, would it matter? Because the retreat of public service broadcasting, or in the worst case, its collapse, could have really far-reaching consequences for society and also for the media industry. What's not clear at the moment is I don't think this crisis is uniform across Europe. I think there are some institutions that are doing better. They're in a much better position. In Scandinavia, in Britain, they are better funded, but they also face challenges. But what is also clear is that public service broadcasters don't have as much support as they used to from their traditional allies in politics. And that, of course, has been compounded, it's been reinforced by the economic crisis, the recession. And these arguments are rehearsed, they're gone over again and again and again. Even the very saintly BBC does not escape. It's not immune from criticism from politicians and the press. There's some screen grabs here. There are two newspapers in Britain, the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph, who absolutely despise the BBC. They really hate them. And if they get a chance to criticise them, then they will. But often there's reason, because the BBC messes up a lot. So they're criticised for paying their staff, their top staff, too much money. And the big measurement is if they earn more than the Prime Minister. 27 BBC bosses earn more than the Prime Minister, okay? So there's scandals about high pay, about financial mismanagement, about spending money that they shouldn't have spent, about poor decision making, you know, if they're buying IT or other resources, about scandals. I mean, at the BBC, they had a paedophile, Jimmy Savile, who was active within the BBC for absolutely years. There are complaints about repeats, that they don't show enough new programming, that they show poor programming, that they show voyeuristic programming, that they are not any different from their commercial rivals, that they show the same old shows as the commercial broadcasters, like, you know, talent shows or The Voice or Strictly Come Dancing. And in the UK at the moment, we've got an election coming up, and the politicians are already promising to give the BBC a good kicking, especially the Conservatives. So it'll be interesting times. But I think one of the problems for public service broadcasting is that the differences between public service broadcasting and commercial broadcasting are becoming less and less. So there used to be a time when you could say, oh yeah, that's commercial broadcasting, that makes money, and this is public service broadcasting, that doesn't make money. So they're supposed to be non-profit. But most public service broadcasters, they're into commercial activities as well to supplement their income. Some of them have taken advertising in the past. I know that RTVE did. Some of them have commercial subsidiaries where they're selling programming, where they're, you know, selling merchandise and licensing rights. It used to be that, you know, commercial broadcasters made popular media that had big audiences, and public service broadcasters were supposed to do high quality stuff that could attract low audiences. But again, we see changes there. Public service broadcasters are trying to compete with the commercial broadcasters. They have soap operas, they have light entertainment programs. Public service broadcasters are there to produce something for everyone. Okay, it's a national broadcaster usually. It's publicly funded, so it should be there to provide something for everyone. But increasingly, you're seeing little niches. You're seeing, you know, different channels for youth or for children or for sports fans. They're supposed to reflect the nation as well. Okay, unlike commercial broadcasters who can be national or international, global. But increasingly, a lot of public service broadcasters are becoming international as well. You know, they want to spread their message, they want to sell their programs, they want some influence. So if we talk around all these differences, we can see that there's a blurring between public service broadcasting on the one hand and commercial on the other hand. And if you blur things, that makes it much more difficult to define public service broadcasting. And if you can't define it clearly, it makes it much more difficult to to defend. And it's really important to get this right because, as we know, the media landscape is really changing. People are changing the way they view television, the way they watch television, and we're seeing a real revolution in terms of institutional relationships, hierarchies, and also business models. So we've seen some blurring there. So we know that public service broadcasting, we know there are some definitions of public service broadcasting. So the next thing that we could look at is, do public service principles still make sense in this converged multi-platform world? Given all these challenges and crises and criticisms, does it still make sense to have public service broadcasting? If we switched off RTVE or BBC tomorrow, would anyone notice? Well, I think a good place to start is with some principles that were first outlined by the Broadcasting Research Unit in 1985, when they published something called the Public Service Idea of British Broadcasting. And this is something which has been often repeated, but it's quite useful to go through it because it helps us to think about how the principles of public service broadcasting have changed. And the first thing that they talked about was universality, and they were thinking about geographic universality, and it was the idea that content should be available to everybody, to everyone in the whole country. So if you lived in Spain, then if you lived in, I don't know, the Basque Country, you could receive the broadcasting, or if you lived in the south, or if you lived in the UK, you could receive it in Scotland or Cornwall or wherever. So everybody could get broadcasting. Now, of course, that has been undermined by cable and satellite. Public service broadcasters have channels that are only available on cable or satellite, so some of those channels are not available to everybody. For example, my mother doesn't have Freeview, so she can't get all the channels. Or there are new services like online services. You can do streaming of public service channels. You can, access their online content. But I don't know what it's like in Spain, but in the UK, up to 30% of the population still don't have online access. That's mainly older people. So not everybody has universal access, and it may get worse because traditionally broadcasters were distributed by spectrum, and governments are selling off that spectrum, the airwaves. They're selling them off to mobile phone companies. So there'll be less room to accommodate broadcasting. So it might have to go on, broadband or wherever. Now, the second principle that the BRU talked about was universality of appeal and provision for minorities. And basically, that's the idea that content should cater for all interests and tastes, including minorities, to make sure that there is a plurality of voices, a wide range of voices, because you don't want it to be too one-sided. You want, different parts of the population to be represented. So you don't just want programs for rich people who go and visit the opera. It's important to have programs like soap operas that appeal to everybody, and children's programs, and programs for older people and people from ethnic minorities. And this is historical. It stems from that time when one institution had to satisfy the broadcasting needs of everyone. Now, it doesn't mean that all programs have to satisfy everybody at the same time, but that a range of programs should be offered and should appeal to different people at different times. But this has come under threat. Some critics think that public service broadcasting should only do certain things. They say that public service broadcasting should just do what commercial broadcasters are not very good at. And that means primarily boring things, or what are perceived as boring, like information and education. And they say that public service broadcasters shouldn't do entertainment. But I would argue without entertainment, public service broadcasting would be even more unpopular than it is now, It's absolutely crucial that public service broadcasting does those big audience shows that bring the nation together. Not all the time, but it has to have some of those shows. Another principle is that the BRU said that public service broadcasting had a special relationship with national identity and community. And that this special relationship is forged through things that we all enjoy together, like news or sport or national events or fantastic dramas that everybody wants to watch. But of course, it's much more difficult for public service broadcasters to show sport now because it's so expensive. And also, in certain countries, can one institution really represent societies which are increasingly fragmented and diverse? Can one organisation really represent the nation? That's something that was almost ignored in the UK recently. I mean, the Scots almost went independent, and nobody thought about, well, what would happen to the BBC? And I know that that's something that is important in Spain as well, because you have a very strong system of regional broadcasting that is really important. The other principle that the BRU talked about was independence. Independence from government, but also from vested interests, from commercial interests. Now that's really essential because public broadcasters can't contribute to the formation of public opinion unless they're perceived to be independent. However, the reality is really complex. Public service broadcasters don't operate within a vacuum, and there are many opportunities for politicians and other vested interests to exert pressure on them, on appointments, on content, on governing boards, on the money. Which leads me to the next principle, is universality of payment by all users. Now, when they wrote this, many broadcasters were funded by the licence fee. Some, for example, Spain, were funded by advertising. Now, the licence fee is now only used in a very small minority of countries. Most countries have replaced it by a form of direct taxation, which makes public service broadcasters quite vulnerable to governments. Another principle, and I've highlighted it because I think it's the fun principle, is that public service broadcasters are supposed to compete for good programming, not for ratings. And this is where public service broadcasting can really excel. It can take risks for the creative industries. It can commission things that really, really make a difference. It can promote creativity. It can satisfy domestic audiences through the production of very high quality content, usually drama. And the example I like to quote is the Danish drama, The Killing. Has anybody watched that? Have you seen Danish dramas in Spain? Have they been shown? Well, they have done really, really well. This is an example of a really, Denmark is a really small country. It has 5 million people. Okay, but they hit the jackpot big time with The Killing, which is an amazing crime drama, and Borgen, which is a political drama. And they made a big commitment. They have good funding. They decided to invest in drama. The dramas were made by independent producers, and it was a way of public service broadcasting really putting something into the industry, into the community. And what's more, they made money internationally. They sold these programs across Europe, to other Scandinavian countries. They were quite successful in the UK, and they sold the format rights to America. So they remade it in America. So they did really, really well. So even small countries, if the system, if the structures are right, can make fantastic programming which really, does well. But the sort of thing that also does well is, this is a BBC programme, Strictly Come Dancing. It's done fabulously well internationally. Do you have it here in Spain? It's like where people ballroom dance, yeah? Okay. It's been criticised for doing that. It earns the BBC lots and lots of money because they sold the format to America. So the BBC is changing. It's becoming an international organisation. But it brings back that sort of that criticism about whether public service broadcasters should really be doing entertaining programming. So I've gone through the principles, but some people say, you know what, public service broadcasting is rubbish. It's so 20th century. Why do we need it? We don't need it anymore. Somebody was saying this, Mike Tracy was saying this in 1998. He was saying it was a 20th century idea dreamt up in the 19th century. And you can kind of understand that because at that time there was only one broadcaster. So the people who were at the top, the elites, thought, well, you know what, we're just going to give people what they need. We're going to give them what they need, serious stuff, rather than what they want, which is the entertainment. And that very boring old gentleman there is the first Director General of the BBC, and he was epitomised that view that you must not give the public what they want. You need to give them what they need. Okay, right. So let's move on then to public service broadcasting in the 21st century. So there are three issues I'd like to address today, and I think I'm going to give more attention to the second one because it's more fun. The first one is public service broadcasting's relationship with the state. This is crucially important because it tells us something about public service broadcasting's role in society and the extent to which they've been given the space to respond in a media landscape which is characterised by lots and lots of media outlets, lots of choice, blurring platform boundaries, and the fact that people are just watching television in different ways. And the second thing I'm going to look at is public service broadcasting and the relationship with future generations. This is about engagement, how they engage with people and their ability to attract younger people, especially children. And I want to focus on it because often it's not looked at, and I think it's quite important. And finally, by way of conclusion, I'm going to look at public service broadcasting as part of the wider communications environment, because the environment is changing, the way we watch television is changing, and public service broadcasters need to change as well. So, oh, that's not very good, I've switched myself off. Oops. Oh, back again. We're back. Okay, so let's look at the changing relationship with the state. As I said, it's vital because it tells us something about public service broadcasting's contribution to society. So, it goes without saying that public service broadcasting has always been really strongly linked with the state. And however strong and influential a public service broadcaster is, that state public service broadcasting relationship is always going to be tricky and awkward and difficult. The relationship is strongly historical. It shows something called historical path dependency. And what that basically means is that, whatever is going on in the outside world, the state's approach to public service broadcasting tends to follow the familiar national paths. And that usually reflects, for example, the way in which politicians feel they can interfere and intervene. Now, those regulatory arrangements are often very, very slow to change, unless there's a crisis. And then they can change really quickly and unexpectedly and suddenly when public service broadcasters are at their weakest. Now, you may remember when they shut down RTVV here, but I remember in 2010 when we had the financial crisis just after, and the coalition government just went in and they cut the BBC's licence fee by 20%. And gave them lots of restrictions. There was no debate, nothing. There was no democracy, no transparency, whatever. And it really brought home to me the power that the state has. I mean, in the UK, in theory, they could close down the BBC tomorrow. The Home Secretary has that power. But it's useful to remind ourselves that when public service broadcasters started off, they were started off by the state for particular reasons. For the state, the public service broadcasting was a key policy instrument to achieve certain goals. And it was all about making programming that would help forge social cohesion, togetherness, and national identity. And broadcasting was seen as being really important in that respect. And the relationship with the state was also symbolic, because public service broadcasting reflected the national view, in times of celebration or crisis, in sport, in those times where we're all affected, public service broadcasters represented us. And often they did this quite paternalistically, quite top down. They simply offered us what they thought we needed rather than what we wanted. Now, of course, the situation has changed, and we have seen these tensions surface quite clearly. We could ask ourselves, though, with the changes that have occurred and with all the different options that viewers now have, we could ask ourselves the question about whether national public service broadcasters are bound to diminish. Is the nation state still willing and capable of using public service media as part of their policy toolkit? How are they going to treat public service broadcasting in future? Are they going to reduce it to becoming a minor role in the national landscape, or are they going to encourage it to take on a bigger role as a force for social cohesion and national conversation? There are different roles that public service broadcasting can take. It can either have this narrow role, or it can have this expansive role where it's a real contributor to democratic society. It can be a defender of national culture and local industries against the forces of globalisation. If you want to defend your screen industries against American invasion, well then, maybe you should be putting some money into public service broadcasting and making sure that they commission fantastic films and drama. Or it could be an exporter of national culture, or even as a projector of the state's soft power. I can see that that's where the BBC is going, in quite a different route from many other public service broadcasters. It's becoming much more of a commercial animal and much more of an imperialist, about selling itself and selling a kind of a UK vision. But there are also questions about the relationship with the state. What happens in countries like Spain or the UK, where there are strong forces for devolution that place question marks about a national broadcaster? What happens also if support for the main political parties weakens, changing the political climate? In the UK, our political parties, none of them can get a majority now. We have lots of new little parties. I think it's the same across Europe. How does public service broadcasting survive when the political climate is changing as well? There are, of course, no clear answers to these questions, because all public service broadcasters have different relationships with the state. There's never been a single model of European public service broadcasting. They're all a bit different. In some countries, the government is more interventionist. In other countries, they're not. In theory, public service broadcasting should be distanced from the state and from all vested interests. But the reality, as we all know, is that public service broadcasters are subject to real and hidden pressures on their operations, on the way they run their business, on who they appoint. And increasingly, regulation is used to hold public service broadcasters back, to hold them back from getting into areas that commercial rivals want to keep for themselves. And increasingly, there's less political support for public service broadcasting. In the past, the left used to support public service broadcasting. Now, they're not so sure. So life is much more difficult. So, this shift in the relationship between the state and public service broadcasting has really been speeded up with the rise of digital media and social media, and moves away from the mass communications framework that used to shape media policy. So this might suggest that the days of public service media are numbered if governments come to think, well, you know what, we don't need public service media anymore. The public are all watching YouTube, so let's just get rid of it and save some money. There are plenty of other media out there. So I think what has changed is that public service broadcasters really need to show much more clearly their value and their distinctiveness and their independence, and that is really, really difficult to do. Now, in some ways, you know, nothing has changed. These challenges represent a continuation of earlier threats. I mean, there are many public service broadcasters who've always had a problem with politicians. What has changed is that public service broadcasters are no longer just in competition with private broadcasters, but they're in competition with large US-based intermediaries like YouTube and Netflix and Amazon, who operate without any public service rules, who operate without any national allegiance either, because they're transnational. You know, these services pose challenges to national PSBs in respect of their funding and their remit. And the development of these choices could give governments and states choices about whether they really want to continue with public service broadcasting. So, where the state might once have wished for national broadcasters that brought the nation together, that might not be necessary in future. But the ability of public service broadcasters to respond to these really fundamental challenges depends on their ability to do lots and lots of things. It depends on their ability to keep and attract the best managers. They need fantastic management. They need really smart, creative people. They need money. They need to keep politicians' political influence to a minimum. They need to anticipate rather than just respond to developments. And actually, what they really, really need to do, and I think a lot of them don't do it, is they need to make stuff, they need to make content that people actually want to see, that they actually want to engage with on the right platforms and at times that are convenient to the public. So it's the age-old dilemma of public service broadcasting having to be popular but also distinctive. But this is a really difficult thing to do because it's much harder for them to change and renegotiate their relationship with the nation state if they were weak at the start, if they were subject to excessive state control, and if the public don't really care about them. So I think one of the biggest problems of greater concern in the relationship with the state is actually the feeling that many public service broadcasters have lost the ability to respond and engage with their publics and civil society, precisely because they're actually too close to the politicians. And combined with diminishing reach and changing patterns of consumption, public service broadcasting, it won't die suddenly. It will die over time. It will die a slow, lingering death from a combination of political interventions and declining support from the public because they are neither popular nor distinctive. So that moves me on to my second point, well, first one I made about the state. So to illustrate this, I want to move to public service broadcasting and its relationship with future generations. And this is about engagement with the young, and particularly children, because if you don't get them young, then you'll never get them at all. Because public service broadcasters, they need to build new interest and support. The problem with public service broadcasters at the moment is that they have very old audiences. I think the average age of the audience of ZDF in Germany is over 70. And in the UK, I think it's like 58 or something. So it's an ageing audience. Young people aren't watching. But they used to watch. And just to break it up, I want to... hopefully this will work. Oh gosh. I think I need some help. Oh, hang on. Oops. Yay. Okay. Okay, this is a little video
Once upon a time, on a little island where it often rained, there was a broadcasting corporation who realised that small people, like me, were different from big people. That's really and so they decided to make programmes for small people as well. Thank you. Programmes that small people would learn from without even knowing it. Pew pew, Bunham Grove, Cuthbert Dibble and Grub. But small people soon became big people too. Taxi! And magically produced small people of their own. Bye. So the corporation decided to make even more programmes, this time for the new generation of small people.
Hello, would you drop this in for me?
Okie dokie.
What a nice young man, Jess.
Bagpuss lives here. The corporation continues to entertain and educate small people. Morning. With an enormous variety of programmes, like these animated programmes.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Ben.
Welcome to my shop. You know where the changing room is, young sir?
Futuristic programmes. Long-running programmes. Pioneering programmes.
Hello again, and we begin today with...
Nice shirt. Playful programmes.
Have a look and see what they are through the square window.
Come on. Magical programmes. Dramatic programmes.
This rather cute little fella is an 8-week-old Bengal tiger cub. Now, sadly, they're extremely...
Really wild programmes. But they can only continue to make small people's programmes thanks to a unique way the corporation is paid for by the big people.
Well, didn't we turn out to be a nation of well-rounded individuals?
Okay, the reason I showed you that is because what's interesting about that promo, and it was made in 1998, is it reflects a very retro view of childhood, even down to the school uniform with the little shorts. It's looking backwards, it's reassuringly old-fashioned, and what they're doing is they're appealing to adult memories, secure in the belief, this was during the fight for the last licence fee, that everybody had that common memory of watching all those programmes. We all grew up with them. And they keep on, if you listen to the narrative, they keep on saying it's stuff made for small people because of the unique way it was paid by the big people. So it wasn't aimed at children, it was aimed at adult licence fee payers. It was made before the BBC started digital children's channels, at a time when it still had children's programming on its main channels. Most of the programmes referenced are quite old, they're from the 60s and the 70s. The animation is quite sweet, but it was made by British companies. And what's really noticeable about this is the variety of stuff. These are the highlights of a mini schedule for children. So it's not just cartoons. That's really important. It's not just cartoons, because if you're watching Nickelodeon or Disney, it would just be cartoons. This is not just cartoons. It's drama, it's entertainment, it's learning. And in its current campaign, the BBC is trying to do the same thing with celebrities. But it doesn't have the same resonance because they're playing it to an audience. Your average 30-year-old, if you ask them about the programmes they watched when they were kids, it won't be BBC programmes. It'll be Nickelodeon programmes or Disney programmes because they've grown up with different programmes. But the point I'm making is it's about growing up with public service as small people. They say programs that they would learn from without even knowing it. Without even knowing it, that you have to be enculturated into the habit of understanding public service broadcasting. It's all about growing up with it. And that enculturation of public service broadcasting as a child is grounded on the same criteria and the same principles that would apply to programming for big people. So universal access is not just about delivery on free platforms, it's also about language. Language is really important, and I know that they speak a different language here in Valencia, so children's programs in the Valencian language would be really important. It's about content that is relevant and readily understood by children in their own language. It's about diversity, and that means opinions, different types of genres, not just cartoons. It's approaches that included entertainment and appealed to a diverse audience. So he's talking about it's magical, it's dramatic, it's really wild, it's not just cartoons. And independence also applies to children's programs. And I'm not just talking about independence from the state, I'm talking about independence from corporate and commercial interests, and that's pivotal. It's really important in terms of trust. If you watch children's programs nowadays, if you watch the cartoons, including the cartoons on the public service broadcasters, you know, they're basically animated ads for toys, a lot of them. So that's quite an important aspect. And it's also about distinctiveness and innovation and taking risk, and that what they're doing is different. So public service broadcasters, if they're doing children's programming, they should be doing different things to what Disney is doing or Nickelodeon. They should be doing, you know, news, they should be doing drama. But the challenge is really how to apply all those principles in a more deregulated digital landscape. Because children have so many more choices now. So, public service broadcasters everywhere have invested quite heavily in children's programming. They're not stupid. They know that children's constitute, you know, a core component of what they do. It's an area where they can show that they are true public service broadcasters with true public service credentials. They won't get criticised by the politicians because usually it's not very political. And for all European public service broadcasters, the provision of local content is really, really important. So Dutch broadcasters will talk about it's really important that children can identify with the characters, that it's child-centred. In German-speaking Switzerland, they have a problem because they have this big, powerful neighbour, Germany, and the children are watching German public service broadcasting. So they have to think of new ways to appeal to their children with Swiss culture and the Swiss German language, which is much, much different from the German language. Even in a small market like Denmark, they're really keen on, it's a small country, it's got 5 million people, it has 2 children's channels, but for them it's really important that their children grow up with their culture. And even in a tiny country like Slovenia, they try and make sure that they're different, that they're distinctive, by dubbing the shows in very high quality Slovenian, rather than cheaply, which can be done as well. So children's is a really important part of the public service remit. The performance varies from country to country. Some countries have more money than others. Some countries don't have much money at all and they still make amazing children's programmes, so you don't often need much money. Most public service broadcasters have been allowed to expand their activities into the digital realm, so a lot of them, the larger ones, have their own channels. So they're not very good at online stuff yet, and that is a bit of a problem. Funding remains the critical issue. But of course the background to children's programming has really changed. And what I'm trying to say here is that children's is really a microcosm of what happens in the adult world. The landscape is changing fast. So you have public service broadcasters and you have, you know, your national commercial broadcasters, which you used to have. You've gone from scarcity to abundance. In children's, you've gone from blocks on general channels to lots of dedicated children's channels. But there's also more commercialisation, there's more marketing. A lot of what is shown has close affinities with toy companies. It's impossible to get animation made these days without getting one of the animation companies involved. And in fact, Mattel, that do Barbie and He-Man and stuff, own a company called Hit Entertainment, who do Bob the Builder. So the toy companies are involved in actual production. There is, according to one person I spoke to, an absolute tsunami of marketing-led programming. And I'm sorry to say that a lot of it finds its way onto public service broadcasters. There are two key developments to note. Disney, Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network are available in lots of European markets. But increasingly they're under pressure, and they're under pressure from new players, Netflix and Amazon. In America, the three big channels have seen a 25% drop in their children's audience because children are migrating to other platforms. YouTube, 2 months ago, just launched its YouTube Children's app, which is funded by advertising, which raises all kinds of issues. Some of the most popular programs on the YouTube Children's app are where children unbox toys, or Kinder eggs and stuff. So it's like advertising, it's like product placement. Now, I don't want to emphasise this because conventional television is still hugely popular with children, but it is beginning to lose out to online viewing and social media, particularly amongst YouTube. And in a recent report by Ofcom, a quarter of 12 to 15-year-olds and 3 in 10 8 to 11-year-olds said that they preferred to watch YouTube than television. So these are the type of things that they're doing. This is a very popular thing in the UK, which is Minecraft. And on YouTube, children are watching videos made by adults about their Minecraft world, and they're incredibly popular. So growing numbers of young people particularly are watching or listening to non-scheduled audiovisual material on other platforms. And also, rather than being convinced by the goodness of a public service ethos, they appear to be much more sceptical about the benefits of public service broadcasting, as opposed to social media like Facebook or Twitter or Google or YouTube. The shifts in consumption are underlined in the way that the next generation of children access media, frequently on mobile phones. And I think research has shown that in the UK that children would be far more upset about losing their mobile phone than the internet or television. So they're doing a lot on mobile. Even toddlers are changing their habits. Toddlers are using iPads and they get frustrated. They've done research where they show a toddler playing with a magazine. They're given a magazine and they try to swipe the magazine and then they get frustrated and throw it away, because for them a magazine is just an iPad that's broken. So these events have had some effect on what people think is going to happen in the children's sector. And the predictions are pretty gloomy. There are concerns about the audience shifting, how you're going to fund content as audiences fragment. There are fears that it will be the large aggregators like YouTube or Amazon that become the most powerful. And there are predictions that channels won't exist in the future, that everybody will be watching stuff on YouTube. I'm not sure whether that's entirely true, but I think it is worrying enough because organisations like YouTube, Netflix and Amazon, they don't operate within a public service ethos. They are commercial companies, and they don't always observe the rules and regulations that are observed in Europe on things like advertising to kids. There are concerns about what's going to be made for kids, that there won't be enough money, there will be reduced diversity, that there won't be drama, that when they go and commission shows, that it will not be done by creative instinct but by analytics, that people will, shy of taking risks, and that ultimately that will be bad for the range and diversity of children's programming. So with that short diversion, what we can say is that public service broadcasters can do a really good job in children's content, and it's a really good way of, you know, showing that they're distinctive. But there are lots of critical issues that are not going to go away. There's not enough money. They don't make enough programming. They're not battling not just Disney and Nickelodeon, but also YouTube. There are beginning to be gaps in provision, with less drama, less information programming. It's quite difficult to police the way that children are targeted as consumers within programming now, with subliminal sort of product placement. There are issues about the plurality of public service provision. And also for public service broadcasters with their limited budgets, it's really difficult for them to keep up with the online players who children are gravitating towards. So I think that the underlying argument I'm trying to make is that if you don't look after your young audience, then you may not have an audience in 20 or 30 years' time, and that's when the crunch will come, when public service broadcasters may find that they don't have even less support than they have now. So far I've outlined the challenges, crises and criticisms that face public service broadcasting, and I've pinpointed two areas of deeper concern that pose existential challenges to the future of public service broadcasting longer term, threatening the demise or decline of public service broadcasting. The first is the awkward and changing relationship with the state, and the second is the relationship and engagement of younger viewers and children who represent the future users of public service broadcasting, and unlike earlier generations have more opportunities to avoid it entirely if they want to. In both cases, changes in the broader environment with new players and a shift in audience consumption are not good indicators for the future health of public service broadcasting. I've tried not to view these developments solely through a BBC lens, because British people always go on about the BBC, and within the public service family it's a bit of an exception, not least because of its size and its funding. But it's worth mentioning here because the BBC isn't immune from these changes either. And arguably the real test of public service broadcasting is whether it can survive in those countries where it's really under pressure. As I pointed out before, the one major concern is the widespread feeling that public service broadcasters have lost the initiative to respond and engage with their publics, precisely because they are too close to political elites at the expense of the multicultural societies they're supposed to serve. And combined with diminishing reach and consumption among the younger generation, they risk becoming less relevant over time. So there are different solutions. What can they do? How can they survive? Well, for David Hendy, the solution is for public service broadcasting to become less hierarchical, to be less top-down, and to allow its content to be shared, manipulated and crowdsourced by the public, and to create a digital public space that nurtures trust and makes public service broadcasters trusted guides within the ocean of abundance which is out there. I think what he means is that public service broadcasters need to stop thinking that they're broadcasters, and they need to think much more about being cultural institutions which not only provide services to the public whenever they want them, but also have a dialogue and a relationship with the public, allowing the public to participate and engage creatively so that the institution is no longer top-down. The problem is that I would argue that that's quite difficult for public service broadcasters to do. They're still largely one way, they're limited. I'm not so sure they're going to change too soon, not least because they face financial strictures, and they're also very mindful not to venture too much into areas that are deemed really the areas of commercial broadcasters. Where public service broadcasters can and do make a difference is in the support of local production, provision of information that counteracts other sources that might cut users off from different and unexpected views. In many countries, they are the main or primary funders of domestic drama, documentaries and children's output, so if you don't have them, you might not get that content. However, there is no certainty about resourcing for public service media, and in many European countries, they involve institutions that are not popular or distinctive. Many public service broadcasters do try and collaborate with others. They do work with professional programme makers and independent producers. But their engagement with the public in ways that are interactive and participatory and democratic is still quite limited. Others suggests that we need to get rid of the institution of public service broadcasting. Why do we need it? These institutions can't reform themselves. Clark and Aufderheide have proposed deinstitutionalised public media. This is a system where you source content from lots of different organisations and individuals that fulfil a community civic function. They point to opportunities for many organisations and individuals to choose, converse, curate, create and collaborate on many different platforms, reinforcing the idea of public media rather than public service media. Graham Murdoch has argued for a reinvention of public broadcasting along similar lines through collaborations that create the basis for a new shared cultural space, a digital commons where you can forge new connections and stand against the pressures from commercial interests. But I think many public service broadcasters are not really ready to engage with alternative communities. As institutions, they're too wrapped up in sorting out their internal structures and placating their political masters and commercial rivals. In a public service world, the broadcasting model I don't think will be replaced anytime soon because it's still very entrenched and top down and doesn't have the capacity really to change in such a radical way. So I leave you with a quote from a regulator who I interviewed. And this is, the future. This is what keeps regulators awake. That public service broadcasters exist in an environment that is changing rapidly, and that makes them more secure, and the internet threatens to undo the national audience through dispersion, dislocation and disconnection. And doubts about public service television have been further deepened by concerns about the sustainability of public funding. But I think one of the big challenges really is how you will actually find them in the new environment of screen media, which is going to probably be much more online based. And I think this is a real challenge for them to promote themselves, promote what they do, and make sure that the public service brand really, really survives. But I think the prospects are not that great. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Steemers. Abrimos ahora un turno de intervención para que se puedan plantear preguntas. Como ayer, lo haremos. Si la pregunta se quiere plantear en español, intentaré traducirla para la ponente. Creo que tenemos el micro. Aquí hay una pregunta. Creo que el micrófono lo tienen ahí arriba, sí.
Sorry? The microphone. Pardon?
The microphone. The microphone. Okay. Está allí. Es aquí.
Hi, I will try to do my best. You have already mentioned that conservatives want to kick the BBC, and I'm not pretty sure. I have many doubts about it because, for example, here in Spain we have a government that is trying to control the national TV, and I'm just thinking what's going to happen, for example, in the next years if we have YouTube, blogging, like broadcasting online. Do you think that this model is going to change? Do you have that we also need universal access to the internet to every single one? Because, for example, right now you have already mentioned that we have different people, different times. So here in Spain is right now is difficult because we have, as I said, we have a government that is trying to control the public message. So what do you think? What do you think that is going to happen here in Spain? Do you guys see that this country is getting, worse with the recession, through the recession? Thanks.
Well, I don't really know enough about the Spanish economy to say about the recession. I've heard that the economy is getting a little bit better. Is it true?
They say so. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I think public service broadcasters everywhere are kind of under threat they're always under threat. But when there's no money, they're even more under threat. As far as I know, RTV is funded by government money. Yes, now. Yeah. Okay. I think that makes it quite a juicy target for politicians to restrict that money, and we call it in the UK, we say it's salami tactics, where you keep on cutting off a bit each time, so the salami gets smaller and smaller, and that's certainly the case in the UK. The Conservative government, the Conservative-led coalition said this week that it would freeze the licence fee. So that means that they're not getting any more money. So they're going to have to find income from other sources. And I suspect that in Spain maybe they want to reduce the money as well. So it makes it much more difficult for public service broadcasters to respond. That's not to say that sometimes they can't be run better. Sometimes they can, make some reforms, or they can change the way that they make programs and stuff, so that they don't spend so much money, so they can become more efficient. But I think that gets to a stage where you can't do it anymore. So there are two different arguments. There's the economics, which is one thing, and then there's the political interference as well, because I think that politicians do use those threats to bring public service broadcasters in line, and they certainly do it in the UK. I mean, because you don't hear about it. But, it's the politicians that appoint the people that sit on the BBC Trust or in Ofcom, and they will usually make sure, it started under Labour where they started making political appointments, and the Conservatives have continued with that. So I know that politicisation happens in Spain, and it happens in other countries as well. It happens in Germany, it happens in most countries. The only countries where I think it probably doesn't happen so much is in Scandinavia. But I think even there it happens a bit. They say it doesn't happen, but I don't believe them. Politicians, it's just too tempting for them to just interfere.
Okay. But the difference here is a few years ago we have commercials, and right now we are not getting more money from commercials. So the quality of the service is still pretty bad.
Yeah.
And right now, for example, young people are following many YouTubers like a way to entertain them. And so that's the reason why, for example, the BBC model looks very good, because you have different kind of channels, and is quite you have a huge range of products.
Yeah,
Here in Spain is different.
Yeah.
No matter what, if you have commercials support or not, still is pretty bad.
Yeah. I mean, that was a really interesting move that they made in Spain, because they stopped advertising, which I think really seriously compromised RTV's programming, because they were competing for advertising money as well, so they had to show similar types of programs. It's a shame that it hasn't worked out and that their programs haven't got better, but maybe that's also to do with the culture there. So it's not always about the money. Sometimes it's about the culture and the will. I mean, I give you an example of, a really interesting culture is Belgium, where you have two public service broadcasters, because you have the French speakers and the Flemish speakers, and they don't speak to each other, And the French system has never done very good programming. The French has really low ratings. All the French speakers are watching French television because it's better. But the way that it's run, it has, that's what I said that made that thing about you need really good management, you need really creative people with a vision. And so it doesn't work very well. But in Flanders, they've made it work. And part of the reason that they made it work is because there is a nationalist perspective. They are really hot on having the Flemish language. That is who they are. That is who their identity. They wanted this channel and they made it work because they want their kids to have programming in Flemish that they make. And it's the same in Wales. I don't know whether you know this, but there's a Welsh language channel which does children's programming. Okay? And their whole thing is you have to catch them young. We want our children to speak the Welsh language because if we don't teach them, nobody else will. So it's about language, it's about heart, and I think it's about having good management. And you can tinker with the structures, and you can say, okay, we're not going to have advertising anymore. We're going to have like government funding. But if you've got the same old people there, and maybe they're doing the same old things, and then it's not going to work. And I think it's really interesting what you say about Spain, because I was talking to somebody who, I think I asked you about whether Netflix had launched here, but I was talking to somebody who runs a Swedish video on demand service called Flodder, I think, and they want to launch in Spain because they really see a market there. Because I think piracy is really big here. Yeah? Yeah. So people are watching, what are you watching? Game of Thrones and all that sort of stuff, yeah? Okay, if I ask all my students whether they're watching Game of Thrones legally, none of them are watching it legally, they're all watching it illegally. So there's pent-up demand. I think if you offered people a legal way of watching that stuff, then they would pay for it if it's not too expensive. I mean, a Netflix subscription in the UK is about £7 a month, which is not much. I think that's probably about €10 a month. Yeah. Okay. So it's cheaper than a Sky subscription. Yeah. So the market here, it's true that if public service broadcasting isn't giving you what you want, then in 10 or 20 years' time there might not be an RTV because nobody will care.
But I remind you that you guys, I saw the stats that, for example, the first country was India, and then I think that the third or the fifth was UK, then is Spain. So we are not the country that we have already most illegal or piracy.
I think China is quite bad.
China, yeah.
There are more of them, yeah. Yeah, no, piracies, but it's indicative that they're not, and particularly your generation, and I think the research in the UK shows that people under 24, they're just, they're going online. I mean, just anecdotally, my own kids, my son is glued to his phone. I bought a Netflix subscription because I knew he was watching it illegally and I was scared of getting, fined. So.
¿Alguna pregunta?
I want to thank Professor Steemers for his comprehensive and stimulating lecture, and I think that the public service broadcasting have not taken enough advantage of the opportunities of the online and digital media environment. Do you think that if public service broadcasting goes more to the digital landscape, their role will be strengthened? And do you think that it's too late for that?
I think it's really, really important, but I have some sympathy for public service broadcasters. I can refer to two different examples. Now, in the UK, the BBC was, it had extra money to do this, so it started getting involved in online stuff quite early on in the 90s, and it's done quite a lot, and it created digital channels. The one thing it hasn't done, it hasn't moved into social media, and I think that that's partly because it's a bit of a nightmare to run social media, because you get like these people like doing things they shouldn't do, and for a public service broadcaster it's difficult if you've got people misbehaving on there and saying nasty things to people and putting up rude videos and pictures and things, so it's difficult for them. Another public service broadcaster in Germany, ZDF, was denied the chance to go online, and they had some stupid rule where they have to remove all their videos after 7 days, all of them, even their news. So if I want to go and look up a news broadcast online from ZDF about, I don't know, Angela Merkel or something, after a week I can't do that. And the reason that they've done that is to protect the press. So it's a political issue as well, because a lot of the German politicians are not well disposed towards German public service broadcasting. I think some broadcasters would like to do more, but if you talk to smaller broadcasters, if you talk to people in small countries like Slovenia or the Baltic states, they have limited resources, so it's not always easy for them to do that. But at the same time, sometimes you can do more online than you can do with normal programming. So yes, I think it's really important that they do engage with different platforms, because the terrestrial platform is going, and I think increasingly people won't be watching so much scheduled television. They will want to sort of watch it when they want to watch it. I think where scheduled television still works is in live television. So sport is really important. Nobody wants to watch sport, so repeat. Those big entertainment shows where people can engage with them, the dancing shows and the singing shows. So yes, I think it's really important that public service broadcasters get involved on a 360 degrees type kind of proposition. But it's not easy for all of them to do that. Sometimes they don't have the resources, and sometimes they're not allowed to. I don't know what the situation is in Spain. Are they allowed to?
They do.
Yeah.
They are.
Okay, and how successful are they at doing that?
They have this. They have the website, and the national TV. They are doing quite well, because they have this website and they do the social media, but the social media are focused on the promotion of the programs. It's like the BBC, I think, and they are doing quite the same as the BBC, with the differences that they have. But yeah, they give you all the content, and even I think that you can have the content outside. So it's.
So I think there are lots of things that they can do, but the core thing I think is also about doing things that people want to watch. I mean, people are still watching television. It's just that they're not watching it always on a television. They're watching it on their tablet or on their phone, or whatever and they're not watching it at the times that the schedulers want them to watch it. Although most people, I don't know what the figures are in Spain, but in the UK most people still watch scheduled television. But at the edges, it's changing. And also, I don't think that they're measuring it properly either. I think it's much higher, but the current rating system is not very good.
¿Alguna pregunta más? Bueno, mientras se plantea alguna pregunta, let me, according to this last question, some authors have thought that maybe the public service media, they should get the leadership for this change from public broadcasting system to public service media. So as you have said, that's not happening, and they don't have enough resources. So are they in danger if they are not following this path? Do you think they're in danger because for a live TV it seems to be a path, it seems to be an evolution, but what happens with drama, what happens with news from a public service media, what happens with that in the digital environment?
I think they have to become public service media, and I think it's less about them being a broadcaster. I mean, this is a long-term development. I think that broadcasting, this one-to-many thing is it's still important, but I think it's going to become less important. And I think that people are, particularly around drama, and so people want to sort of like choose things and watch things when they want. I mean, the people that are will be really wedded to public service broadcasting are older people. I mean, if you think about your own grandparents, I mean, how many people's grandparents use the internet here? Okay, quite a few. They're quite sure. Okay. I mean, now I'm thinking about my own mother, who's in her 70s, is quite scared of it, and she likes to watch things on television. But I think younger generations watch differently. And I think that public service broadcasters, if they don't, otherwise they will be stuck with a dying audience. So they need to engage, really. And they need to show that they can do something different. I think this is the real problem. Because you can say that in the past, public service broadcasters, they often did fantastic dramas, yeah? And I know that RTVE has done some amazing dramas as well around, dramas around the Franco era and stuff like that, yeah. But they're being challenged in that respect as well, because you've got, HBO and Netflix investing in those high quality dramas as well. So they're having some competition there, so they need to show that they're different. And also there's quite a risky strategy as well, in that they are national. I mean, I know you have regional broadcasters here as well, but they are national. And a lot of what television is going is now transnational, across borders. So they need to reflect that side of things without becoming nationalistic, because that would be horrible.
Thank you.